What started out as a pretty simple campaign promise, a promise to expose one of the biggest scandals of our time, well, it quickly spiraled into an absolute political firestorm. This is the story of the Epstein Files Transparency Act. It's about a bitter fight for the truth that led to a totally chaotic document release and a global fallout with some very, very real consequences. Right at the heart of this entire story is a really dramatic reversal. I mean, look at this. In June of 2024, on the campaign trail, Donald Trump made a very clear promise to release the Epstein files. But just a little over a year later, from inside the Oval Office, the message was the complete opposite. The whole thing, he said, was a big hoax. So how on earth do you get from point A to point B? What happened in between? Okay, to really get to the bottom of this, we're going to break this story down into 5 key parts. We'll start with the administration's shifting stance, then we'll move to the incredible fight in Congress to force the release. After that, we'll look at the deeply flawed rollout by the Justice Department, what was actually in the files, and then finally the global consequences of it all. All right, let's dive into part 1, a promise, then a hoax. This is really where a clear commitment to transparency started to completely unravel, and it set the stage for a massive political battle. And this reversal, it happened fast. After that initial promise in June 2024, the messaging just got confusing. In February 2025, you have Attorney General Pam Bondi claiming the client list was literally sitting on my desk. But then, by July, the DOJ's official line was that, nope, no such list had been found. Just a few days later, President Trump declares the whole thing a big hoax, a complete 180 from his campaign pledge. So with the White House now actively blocking the release, the fight shifts over to Congress. And this is where things get really interesting, because an incredible and very unlikely alliance formed to force the administration's hand. To get around opposition from his own party's leadership, Republican Congressman Thomas Massie used this rare legislative tool called a discharge petition. Now, this maneuver, it almost never works. You need 218 signatures to pull a bill out of committee and force a full vote on the House floor. But in a pretty stunning display of bipartisanship, 4 Republicans joined with 214 Democrats to hit that magic number and directly defy the administration. The momentum at this point was just undeniable. When the bill finally hit the House floor, the vote was a staggering 427-1. I mean, that's an almost unanimous demand for transparency. The bill then sailed through the Senate with everyone on board. Faced with that kind of overwhelming pressure, the president, after another last-minute reversal, signed it into law. So the fight in Congress was won, right? But believe it or not, that was only half the battle. Now we get to the actual release of the files, and this process was immediately bogged down in controversy and accusations of a cover-up. The law was crystal clear. The Justice Department had 30 days to release all the files. But on the very last day, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche announced they were going to stagger the rollout. This was an immediate violation of the law, and it sparked instant bipartisan outrage from the very same people who had just passed the act. And the problems just kept piling up. First, the release was staggered. Then, people discovered that hundreds of pages were completely blacked out. Incredibly, some of those redactions could be undone with basic software you probably have on your computer. The DOJ then claimed its work was done after releasing 3.5 million pages, even as reports were suggesting over 6 million existed. And, to make matters even worse, they had to pull back thousands of documents because they hadn't properly redacted sensitive information about victims. It was a mess. And all of this chaos, it stood in stark contrast to what the public wanted. A poll from September 2025 showed that a massive 77% of Americans wanted all of the files released. The demand for transparency was absolutely overwhelming, which only made people more frustrated with how the DOJ was handling the whole thing. So after all that fighting, all that controversy, what was actually in the files? Well, in this next part, we're going to take a neutral look at the contents, and it is so important to approach this with a lot of caution. Okay, this is critical to understand. The Associated Press and a lot of other outlets put out a strong warning. Just because someone's name is in these documents, it does not automatically mean they are guilty of anything. These files are a raw, unverified collection of everything the FBI gathered, from credible evidence all the way to completely baseless tips from the public. And the content was all over the place. You had photos of public figures, flight logs from Epstein's jet, thousands of unverified tips that people had sent to the FBI. There were also emails, personal letters, a truly bizarre and probably fake letter from Epstein to the disgraced Dr. Larry Nassar. And yes, in some cases, pornography. It was a chaotic data dump, plain and simple.
And just to give you a sense of how wide-ranging and sometimes just plain bizarre this material was, one of the released emails from Microsoft revealed that in 2013, Jeffrey Epstein was permanently banned from Xbox Live. It's this strange, almost trivial detail that just perfectly illustrates the sheer random scope of the records the FBI had collected.
Now, the release of these files, as flawed as it was, had immediate and very serious real-world consequences. This information sent shockwaves around the entire globe, leading to resignations, new investigations, and even arrests. Here in North America, the impact was immediate. You had prominent figures like former Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers resigning from his post at Harvard. Thomas Pritzker stepped down as the head of Hyatt Hotels. Goldman Sachs' chief legal officer, Catherine Rumler, resigned. Bill and Hillary Clinton even faced a threat of contempt of Congress before they finally agreed to testify about their ties to Epstein. And the fallout was truly global. Over in the UK, former cabinet minister Peter Mandelson and Prince Andrew were both arrested on suspicion of misconduct. Slovakia's national security advisor resigned, and so did the CEO of Dubai's DP World. So the release of these American documents had these massive, far-reaching international repercussions. So all of this leaves us with a really difficult question. The fight for the Epstein files was, at its core, a fight for transparency. But when that transparency reveals this messy mix of credible evidence, baseless claims, and outright political chaos, it kind of forces us to ask, how do we navigate a landscape like that to figure out what's actually true?